Stardate 741208. Maybe. Welcome to Star Trek Discovery Pod, a kind of smart, kind of funny podcast about new Star Trek and beyond. I'm your reluctant captain, Mike Garcia. With me on the view screen, we have
Mariah Gossett
and Grant Davis.
Our chief engineer, Clyde Haynes, is on an away mission to an ancient generation ship today, so let's hope he doesn't start making new planets in space. But this week, we are live streaming the pod on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, Twitter, covering the 4th episode of Star Trek Lower Decks, Moist Vessel.
So moist.
Moisty.
It's like a cake.
Yes, like a cake, not like what Mariner has to clean up on the holodeck. And before we jump into that episode, Mariah, can you tell the people how they can never miss an episode of this here Star Trek podcast?
Oh, if you never want to miss an episode of our ramblings about Lower Decks and other new Star Trek shows and beyond, you can make sure you are subscribed to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you prefer to listen to your podcasts. We're also live on YouTube at 9 p.m. Central Time on Thursday evenings, giving you all our hot freaks of what we thought about these latest episodes. And all the links, of course, are at StarTrekPod.co.
And I'm going to go ahead and piggyback off of that to remind you guys that if you are checking this out and you like our show and you want a little bit more, we encourage you to go to patreon.com/StarTrekPod, where you can make a per episode pledge. Give us $1 or $2 an episode. I think we always say 2. Give us $2 an episode, and you will be invited to our exclusive Slack channel where you can join a bunch of other passionate Trekkies discussing all things Trek, discussing the world of Trek, the books of Trek, the films, and the many, many shows, both out now, of the past, and yet to come. We are also doing a lot of bonus exclusive stuff just for our patrons, including deep dives into a lot of the movies that have been made. I think currently we are at Star Trek Beyond, which is part of the Kelvinverse. It's the third in the thus far trilogy. And we're going to be discussing that soon for just our patrons. And if you want to hear our thoughts on that silly movie, or is it silly? Maybe it's perfectly fine and enjoyable and nothing to mock about it. You can come join us at
and find out.
Star Trek Pod, patreon.com/Star Trek Pod. We'd love to have you guys join us. And we thank everyone who has thus far for your support. Thanks.
And if you are watching us live tonight on YouTube, please do participate in the live chat. And if you have a comment or a question you want us to address later on during the pod, just type the word pod, P-O-D, in all caps before your comment, and hopefully we'll mention it a little later. Okay, let's talk Lower Decks. Episode 4 is titled Moist Vessel, directed by Barry J. Kelly, who apparently has directed lots of Venture Brothers and Star Wars Galaxy of Adventures, and written by Ann Kim. And listeners, viewers, if it's your first time joining us, you might be expecting us to give you our hot takes on this episode of Lower Decks, but this is Star Trek Discovery Pod. We don't give you hot takes. We give you hot freaks.
Hot freaks!
It's back, baby.
It's back. Mariah, kick us off, then Grant, and then I'll go.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I really liked this episode a lot, just in general. And I feel like it was a continuation from last week, in that it is totally focusing on that sort of workplace situational comedy. When, we have someone who's figured out how to make even the smallest menial, dumb tasks and make them fun. And of course, that's going to get under the skin of management, who just wants them to leave. I've definitely worked at places that didn't like firing people, because then you get things like unemployment. And so they would just instead make your life a living hell, so you would leave. So I definitely related to Mariner in this respect. But she manages to find ways to make nothing into something, and enjoy it along the way. And the entire meeting about office chairs made me laugh probably too hard, because I have 100% been in that meeting. And I think if anyone has ever worked in an office, you've been in a meeting like that. Beyond that, I also really enjoyed that this episode sort of takes that millennial trope that we always move back in with our parents and sort of flips it on its head a little bit, right? Like, she didn't really move back in with her mom. She's somehow just back on this ship with her mom. I think us millennials, or at least millennials on Earth, can relate in that, not everyone qualifies for entry level jobs that you have to have 5 years of experience for. And so we can't afford to live places. So we have to live with our parents. Um, and even beyond that, I really love seeing Mariner and Freeman's relationship continue to develop in this episode. Um, me and my parents, specifically me and my mom, we definitely know what our limits are about how much time we can spend together. And so we plan our trips accordingly. And so that moment at the end when she's like, think of us, mommy and captain, together forever. And that look of doom, I was like, oh, that's when you hit that day too many of hanging out with your parents. So yeah, I like this episode a lot.
Yeah, definitely a big fan of this episode. I think the strengthening relationship of Mariner and Freeman is excellent. It's well done. The continuing kind of just adventures and exploits, and I mean, I like seeing Boimler try to break bad a little bit, and probably at the worst possible time with such an innocuous little like, oops, I spilled something. I'm a bad rebel. That part really killed me, and I thought, yeah, just using this ancient ship as a that can sprout life. I thought there was some interesting kind of parallels in the reblossoming of the relationship or whatever they were trying to kind of go for there. Overall, it was a fun episode, and I was kind of getting echoes of the ship with like Wrath of Khan kind of thing with this, with all the frozen people on that ship. So
Look
it
at
was kind of fun.
Grant making references. Yay!
I know, and it wasn't like a reference to Lost. It was
A
within
Trek
within
reference.
the realm of the show.
I like this episode. I'm finding with every episode, Lower Decks kind of steers more and more into the direction of satire, which I'm enjoying that. It just kind of gets a little wackier and wackier every episode. This is a fourth episode, and I can already tell that this show has its own point of view, its own spirit, its own sense of what it's trying to do on a theme level, on a comedy level. That shows a lot of promise. Like, if you go back and watch like season 1 of TNG or DS9, even some of Discovery, shit's a little shaky and they're still trying to figure a lot of things out. But here, the show is just really showing it has a point of view already, and I love that. I like this episode a lot, probably more than last week's, which I thought had a lot of great little bits, but didn't really add up to much altogether. This one, though, it was smart in centering on Mariner's relationship with her mom, zeroing in on that and their differences, which gave us a good amount of character growth and some really funny mother-daughter butting heads conflict. I can definitely relate to that. Karen in our Slack mentioned that the dynamic between Mariner and her mom, the captain, reminded her of the mother-daughter relationship in the movie Lady Bird, and I had to second that. It's like in that movie. Obviously, this is more of a comedy, but it's potent, it's deep, it's also kind of silly, kind of goofy, and we get to see Mariner. Another thing I love about this episode, we get to see Mariner save the day by being the awesome genius slacker that she is, and that's my sweet spot. Genius slackers saving the day, just like I do every night in my adolescent dreams. Uh, the B plots were a little whatever, but they did like the B plots are whatever, but they were just kind of vehicles for really great jokes. One of my favorites being the skewering of the sci-fi ascension trope.
Oh my
I
god.
think in
We're
every
all
damn sci-fi series, there's always somebody like ascending. Where we had Kess and Voyager, right? And in this episode, they mentioned the Traveler from TNG and Q, and then there's a bunch of them in Stargate. So I love that. And who knew the universe was balanced on the back of a giant koala? I didn't
we're
know.
just all along for the ride.
I didn't know that. Okay, let's dive a little deeper into this episode. Guys, I'm going to be straight with you. I've had a very long day and a very busy evening, and I just watched this one maybe about 20-30 minutes ago. I just wrapped it up, so I'm going to lean on you guys a little bit for the meat of this episode. But tell me more of what you liked about this episode. It sounds like we're all really digging the mother-daughter dynamic we saw.
I have to be honest, I didn't actually watch this, so
It's all me tonight.
Mariah,
Okay.
just take it away.
Let's just remove Grant and me from the stream here. Let
Bye.
Mariah.
Mariah solo hour.
It's
Oh, it's
me
me.
and all the commenters. I thought the cold open for a second, I was almost like, whoa, this is a little disrespectful. And then I remembered this is a comedy, you know?
Mhm.
It was a
Yeah.
little out of place for me.
I agree. It feels weird how blatantly, like, I don't know, it didn't even feel like clever in how disrespectful it was. It was just, I'm going to be a dick during your meeting, and there's another level of discomfort to it because we now know that it's a mother-daughter relationship that's going on there, and that's why this is in a way being tolerated. I don't know. It made me dislike Mariner in a way that, like, before I thought like there's more cleverness to her spiteful behavior toward her mother and how she kind of needles at her. It felt lowbrow. I don't know.
I think later on in the episode, the show kind of earned that moment because Mariner, you realize that Mariner is as smart as she thinks she is. And all this shit does bore her because she probably just took a look at that, what was on the view screen for a second, and got all the information in an instant because she's such a genius. And she was bored. I think it's okay for her to be kind of a dick that way because it's not only is it funny, but I think the show just earns it. I think she earns it. But when I was watching this the first few minutes, I kind of felt the same way until the show went on and kind of earned it.
Right.
Well, I mean, I guess what I was kind of getting from that is it seems to be a bit more revealing about what the relationship between her and her mother is, in that she has a degree of hostility, perhaps from neglect from her mom. I'm guessing that, like, the captain was not like more interested in her own self-interest of this ship than in Mariner, and this is how Mariner kind of lashes out about that. And I say that not so much just from that scene, but also seeing like how Captain was reacting with Ransom, when he was like suggesting things, and she was just taking those ideas, and those were her ideas now, and she was moving forward with them, and he's like, great idea, Captain. And I can see that being the type of thing that also happened in her relationship with Mariner, and Mariner might have just been like, you know what, I'm sick of you, and I'm going to show blatant disrespect.
Yeah, I wanted to just comment that I think Don Lewis, who voices Captain Freeman, and Tawny Newsome, I think have done a good. I don't know if they were able to record these voice pieces in the same room. I know that doesn't happen often with animation, but sometimes if it is like an episode that's heavy with two characters interacting with each other, they will do that. And I know like Bob's Burgers usually tapes with everyone in the same room, but I could really feel like I think they built a smart and good chemistry together as far as like how that relationship has been built. And I think this episode in particular, that like back and forth banter felt so organic and real to me.
It did feel real. It felt like the Captain Freeman is a type of parent who wants the child to be just like her, or the child needs to fit into a specific rubric that she can understand and appreciate. The ideal Starfleet officer. We kind of got that from previous episodes, but it was laid pretty bare in this episode that that's what she wants and that's what she expects from Mariner. And it blinds her to the fact that Mariner is such a brilliant, fun, outstanding, interesting person. And she just doesn't get it. And it takes Mariner saving the ship for her to kind of start to get it at the end. And I kind of like that dynamic. And I like that Mariner saves the ship in part by using like a formula that her mother came up with in her notes, because
Right.
she is a type of person who will see a good idea and will acknowledge it and run with it if it works. And that also kind of comes from the mom too, like the way the mom stole the idea from the was it Ransom who came in?
Ransom,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
right.
parroted that idea back to him. So they do have a lot of similarities. They're both very strong personalities, but they just don't understand each other. And I think some of us can relate to that with our parents. I know I can. Hi, Dad.
I
uh,
know.
well, like
He doesn't know what podcasts are.
uh, peeling back that relationship a little bit further, it seems interesting that we were getting a few more hints at the backstory of what must have gone awry in Mariner's trajectory, because she's already mentioned in previous episodes that she has been on other ships where she was um, doing explorations and making. I think she was even brokering first contact kind of deals, and so she has had a much richer wealth of experience than her lower decks ranks would suggest. So why she's been demoted back to this ship? I mean, I don't know if you guys have any particular theories, but it feels like some sort of last lifeline that she was offered by her mom to come aboard her ship because she did something that she must have been outside of the bounds of Starfleet. And if she's under her mother's supervision, that's like the only way she's able to operate, I'm guessing.
I am interested to find out what her deal is in terms of like why she's on the ship because when the mom was like, well, you can always transfer, like she understood that her mom was trying to get her to transfer. She
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to transfer. Mariner doesn't want to leave the ship, which you think she would because her mom's the captain and she always butts heads with her mom. So, yeah, I want to know why she doesn't want to serve on another vessel. Why I get the theme of why she bucks command so much because we're getting this picture of a command crew that is so a little arrogant and doesn't see the forest for the trees much and can't see like 5 feet in front of them because of their ego. And it seems like she's been around that so much, especially with her parents being commanding officers, that she just doesn't want any part of that. But yeah, I'm curious to find out what the details are. Like, why did she get demoted? Why exactly can't she jump ship or move up the rank
I
uh,
mean,
in a legitimate way?
Right.
yeah. My theory is that she is actually enjoying being on her mom's ship because she can get away with so much more because
Yeah,
it's her mom's ship. And so
yeah,
I bet, my theory would be that she was somewhere else causing trouble. Someone complained to her admiral father and he was just like, "Okay, she has to be your problem from now on," because they obviously are very into moving up the ranks and having this sort of legacy um within Starfleet. And so the idea that their kid would be someone who's negatively viewed in Starfleet, I think is something they're probably trying to protect.
Like hide it, right?
Yeah. And also just as parents, like trying to protect her, and the idea of like, oh, she's still kind of young. She's figuring out what she wants. Like, let's just let her be a little rebellious until she can find her right place. Right. And so it can
yeah.
happen in this sort of guarded atmosphere.
Right. But I kind of, I mean, I already mentioned this, but I kind of don't think that's the case. Her, the suggestion that she was on those other missions seems like she was operating in a highly effective and respectful manner to the point where she had risen in ranks and been able to go out and explore and go on these really elite missions for a while. I'm thinking that there was some incident where she probably did, how these stories go. She did something noble, which was mischaracterized and deemed against the rules and regulations of Starfleet. And so she has been relegated to being back on her mother's ship with a big chip on her shoulder about that whole incident. So now she's kind of checked out. She's letting loose and being defiant because she feels like all of her hard work didn't pay off. She still got stuck here, and Starfleet didn't recognize how good she is, but she still is that good. I mean,
Yeah,
that's like the story
Yeah.
beat, what it feels like to me, but
that
this
I
is
could
all
see that.
speculation. I don't know.
yeah, that would make a lot of sense. I
Hmm.
think there's a huge disillusionment piece that we're missing. Like she was close to command or in command, and she just got disillusioned with the role or with the people around her. because we do see again this picture uh, of the commanders on this ship who are just kind of a bunch of self-important jerks, and even the commander on the other ship is in this episode is a real self-important jerk, so much so that he gets everybody in trouble and almost kills everybody. So
I love when
yeah,
Frieden
it
kept
makes sense
talking
that
about how
she
boring that dude is, though, too.
yeah the Tellarite. It makes sense that she would bump up against command and not like the idea that they're just a bunch of self-important stiffs and get disillusioned with that and say fuck this. Um, Mariah, you hit on something earlier that I wanted to mention. I think it was Jean-Luc Picard who once said that, you know how the Federation doesn't have money anymore, that the currency in the 24th century is your reputation.
Mm.
And that if that's the case, then Mariner's parents are really holding on to that currency, because they're high-ranking Starfleet officials. And yeah, it would make sense that they would want to contain Mariner so she doesn't ruin the legacy of their family and fuck with their reputations.
Right.
Kind of sad, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, and then there's the fun, there's the flip side, which is Boimler, who gets so mad that she gets promoted to lieutenant. And I just love his like weird moment in the hallway when they're like, report to the bridge at 15:30. And he's like, oh, I will. And they're like, what are you talking about? And he's like, oh, I'm on the holodeck and I'm talking to Moriarty, which I thought was like a fun kind of callback to
TNG.
TNG. Yeah, because
Yeah.
Picard is always hanging out in Sherlock Holmes situations.
And Moriarty
okay.
always escapes the holodeck somehow and
Yeah.
takes over the ship. Yeah, yeah.
I think one of the best parts of Boimler going bad, going rogue, is
His
it reminded me
version
of
is spilling coffee. Like
there's not a lot of things to love about Spider-Man 3 with Tobey Maguire, but I think when Venom infects him, the worst that Peter Parker can get is emo Peter Parker, where he's just like, oh, I'm gonna go do some dancing in a club with black
my
clothes on because
God.
I'm evil Peter Parker now, and it's like, oh, that's the worst that pure heart Peter Parker can get. And I felt that way a little bit with Boimler, where it's like, oh, he can't really be that much of a bad boy. The most he can do is like accidentally spill some coffee and be like, oh, yeah, I'm out.
I'm so
Live long and
bad.
prosper.
Um,
and Mariner being like, that doesn't look cool. Damn it, it does look cool, and he does it.
I like that Boimler got a second to look cool, finally.
Yeah.
That was good.
for
felt
one
good.
moment. What did y'all think of Tendy's little B plot throughout this episode?
Good for jokes. I didn't really care about it too much.
Yeah, I'm kind of there with you. I don't know much about the Ascension and Q. I've only the few bits I've kind of gleaned from you guys. I guess it's someone who enters the fourth dimension, exists outside of time, maybe.
There's different variations of Ascension in Star Trek and sci-fi. So yeah.
I find that her line delivery is bubbly and infectious, so it makes me happy to see her like so joyful about certain things in the show, and all the sweeter when she kind of flips and just like is needy, and she's like, I need people to love me. Is that also like a product of her being an Orion? Is it green Orion?
We don't know much about the Orions. We've never really
They've
dove in
always
deep
just
into
been
them very
like,
much.
I thought they
yeah.
were the ones that were kind of lusty, lascivious, but maybe not.
Well, it's. I mean, in like the original series, it's like a lot of the green ladies are sold as maybe unwillingly. So it's, we don't get a lot about their backstory. But I did hear an interest. I was listening to Pop Culture Happy Hour this week and catching up on that particular podcast, and they had a little mini-sode about Lower Decks, and one of them made the comment that Tendi is like the embodiment of this show, and that she just wants everyone to like her, and this show kind of is trying to find a way to make everyone like it as well. And I thought that was, I didn't agree with a lot of the things they said on that particular episode of Pop Culture Happy Hour, but I thought that was an interesting thought, in that Tendi is sort of like the writers, the authors being in there being like, please, please like us, please. We
I
know
don't know if
you
I go that
can.
far. I do think that a lot of people watching this will relate to a character who's really nice and enthusiastic and deep down cannot stand it if people don't like her and gets a little maniacal about that every now and then. I know I can go there sometimes, although you'd never know it.
No.
Um,
Whoa.
um but yeah, I liked the ascension thing. There was lots of like, I found a lot of the things about her being like, oh, if you borrow from all of cultures you can ascend quicker, which I think
right,
is like
right.
a very funny commentary on today's sort of new age spirituality, and that they're like, we're going to just cherry pick from all of these other cultures and call it something else, and then we're going to all recharge our crystals under the moon, and we're going to meditate and do the Reiki, and everything's going to be great.
What did she say? Let me Reiki you.
Yeah.
What is
Um,
that?
what is Reiki?
Yeah.
It's like hands-on energy healing.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yes.
I thought it was a Trek thing. I don't know.
Nope.
No,
Nope.
it's a real life thing.
It's a real life thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Real life
I
thing.
like Tendi's delivery. I like how up and down she goes. I just, I don't know. I wasn't really into the subplot. It was just kind of a one joke thing until the end when they really pushed the Ascension joke as far as it could go. And that's what I was saying earlier. This show is just driving headfirst into satire so hard that if you're like an old diehard Trekkie, seeing that a koala is is it's what you see when you ascend and maybe all existence hinges on a magical koala, it's gonna break your brain. But if you're someone watching the show and having a good time and wanting it to do its own thing and just be so satirical and weird and enjoying that and wanting to see how far Mike McMahon and his crew are gonna push it, then it's great. And I'm in the second camp. I think it's really funny.
Well, then, kind of playing off of that, how do you guys feel that this show fits within Trek canon then? Is this purely outside of it? Because it feels like it's established it is in the same world, and that we should, to a degree, just sort of take some of these things with a grain of salt, that they're a little bit farcical. But overall, the Cerritos was a ship in the world of Trek.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it in the same way that in the world that we exist in, there are places to work that are subpar, even within even within, higher up establishments. I remember, I think a good example is, I was listening to an interview once with people who worked at the White House, and this was even under like the Obama administration, and it was right when like House of Cards came out and Veep was on the air, and like all these political shows, right? West Wing had been on a while before that, and everyone was like, well, what show is like the most accurate, is like what it's like to actually work in the White House? And people said Veep, which to me was terrifying, but also very funny in retrospect. And so it's like, if you think about how many layers of hierarchy there are, I would assume that some of that is going to leak into Starfleet. Like, we can't expect everyone to be a Picard, a Janeway, like a Kirk. It would be absurd to think that everyone who is in charge is amazing. I think our case in point can be made in the current place we live in right now, like of like what is happening. So so I think it is easy to think about how this can be in Trek canon. The ascension bit was, I don't know if we've ever seen a character ascend, so it's up for interpretation, and who knows if he actually ascended or something else happened to him.
Right.
Right. Yeah. I think in terms of like Trek canon, I want to mention something our buddy Nate Bliss said to me once about Star Trek Voyager. And Nate is one of our patrons. He's in the Slack. Hi, Nate. And he's on chat today. Nate recently, maybe a year or two ago, watched the entire series of Voyager. He'd never really seen much of it. And he was like, there's something about this show. The tone is kind of off. It doesn't feel like it belongs in Star Trek. if you watch TNG and DS9, he's like, I kind of enjoy it, but he's like, my headcanon for Voyager is that there was a Voyager with all these characters, and they all got lost in the Delta Quadrant and came back, and then somebody interviewed them all and then made a TV show about it, and that's what we saw.
That's
So
great.
I'm like, you know what? That kind of makes sense. And I was thinking, would that apply to something like Lower Decks? Is this like a show within the Star Trek world about Star Trek? And maybe that's how some people can put it together in their head canon, with the tonal shift and with things like that the koala or whatever being the ascension. But I don't know. I don't really worry about that too much. Like sometimes I'll feel a tinge of like, oh, that doesn't feel Starfleet. Oh, that doesn't feel like the Federation. But then something really funny and clever will happen, and I'm right back in. So I guess I don't worry about it too much.
Mike, I think we had discussed something similar to that. Was it last week, Mariah, where we were talking about the music being in the
Oh,
show
yeah.
Oh, right.
and
Mhm.
how that it's like self-referential for them? Like, oh, does the do the other um, exploits of Captain Kirk and of Janeway and Picard, do those get turned into shows within the world of Trek that they have seen as well? And so now my headcanon is that all Trek shows that we're seeing are recreations of the world of Trek. All of them are different recreations, but of a real otherwise Trek.
Yeah.
I
I
don't
mean,
know.
why not?
Why not?
Or some variation. Yeah, I saw. So Haley Joel Osment was labeled as a guest voice on this episode, which I think is kind of. He's been making some like fun choices recently. I don't
He's
know
great. He's
if
so good.
y'all have been watching.
He
Watched.
was so funny in The Boys.
In the
Yeah.
shadows.
Yeah, What We Do in the
Oh, that too.
Shadows. I loved that episode he was in. But I'm pretty sure the voice of O'Connor, and I saw some folks in the chat saying he also might have been the voice of Captain Durango, but I wasn't sure about that. Whereas O'Connor definitely sounded like Haley Joel. But yeah, I thought the O'Connor character was funny, and like that line about how it's difficult to stand out in Starfleet, I think to me was one of the other, sort of going back to this canon conversation, and would something like the Cerritos exist in Starfleet? I think is a part of that conversation, right? It's hard for these many, many ships to stand out. Like, I mean, we hear about the big, even if we think about this here and now, if we use like the Navy as like a representation of Star Trek, not that that's like the end all be all like way to
It's a
It's
closest
space.
analog, right?
yeah, like the
It's
closest
Space
thing.
Force. Just
Oh
use
my
Space
God.
Force.
No Space Force yet, but it's like we all know, like at least that about the existence of like all the really big boats that go out, right? Like the aircraft carriers and like
Love
maybe
Boat.
some of these
Love
bigger,
boat.
more famous ships, right? Versus like we don't know about every person who worked on like a submarine or a little battle cruiser and like all these smaller vessels, and so it's like it would make sense to me that there are smaller ships doing more menial tasks, because that is a lot of what the military has to do when we're not like quote at war or doing war crimes. So it's like there's other things we have to go around and do.
Um, Jumping back up to a comment from Nate Bliss, the very same. He had mentioned kind of what you were also talking about there, Mariah. Says, I saw some potential foreshadowing for Mariner and Boimler. If things ever went sour between them, it could look a lot like Captain Freeman and Captain Haley Joel Tellerite. So I'm guessing Haley Joel did the voice for that captain as well. Going on, he says, both served on a ship while they were coming up in Starfleet, Freeman being the brazen, outspoken officer, and Haley Joel Tellerite being boring, insecure, and jealous of her. Which I thought was some interesting kind of insight and parallels between the relationship and dynamics of the two up-and-comers and the two established. I don't...
Officers, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys were kind of thinking that was in a way a reflection of their relationship.
I mean, I could see it. I also thought it was just a nice reflection to say, like, hey, the Cerritos isn't the only ship that's kind of out doing these less like fantastical tasks. And
Menial.
so, yeah, like here's like another ship that has to do this kind of stuff, and someone who's maybe even less, um, you know, I don't want to say qualified, but is even
It's like a
less,
flimsier ego.
yeah, like just isn't as up to par as like Captain Freeman is. This guy obviously still has a big ego he needs to check, because he needs to be in the correct place in the formation while they're towing ships. Like essentially they were being tugboats,
Right.
tugboat spaceships. Like
This is our task.
yeah.
Chris
And-
Rogers has a really good comment. He says, "It feels like this show is really good at poking fun at the Trek universe while it's still playing by those rules."
Yeah.
And I think this episode really did a good job of that for the most part. It it was like a million jokes per second. Half of them or more were all about Trek canon, but it's still paying homage and playing within those rules pretty well. Like it might violate them here and there, but it doesn't make me want to scream as an old school Trekker.
Yeah, and I think too the other thing that I've been enjoying about the animated show is that we don't have to, I've said it I think every episode, we don't have to worry about like a special effects budget, right? So I was trying to think about how long it would take to make a ship being turned into organic material, and like how quickly outdated that might look, after a certain point. And so it's kind of fun to get to see these very fantastical things happening on the animated show that I think would be less possible on a live action series.
Mhm.
Right. Speaking of which, I mean that sequence where both ships are suddenly kind of overtaken and infected by this what do you call it, terraforming organic matter thing that just like spreads like a foam virus throughout the ship. It was really cool to watch all that, and seeing the burst of a lot of like underwater kind of plant life. I was wondering if the aliens themselves might be a little bit more aquatic based. Is that maybe the sense of what they were trying to show us based on the kind of life forms that were blooming there?
Yeah,
Uh,
that's definitely possible. Like there's that fun line from Tendi when she's just like, "God damn it, you beautiful coral!" Like,
So, in the world of later iterations of Trek, do they talk further about like terraforming? Because I know we watched the Genesis series of the Trek movies, and that was a lot of what they were kind of exploring there. But
Yeah.
did they move beyond, and like are they able to now terraform planets and like help civilizations kind of relocate? Is that
There's
part
not
of
like a
Starfleet?
uniform terraforming policy that's been established, but it does come up here and there. But just like anything, just as it serves the plot. Like in DS9, there was a bunch of Bajoran terraformers who were having their equipment um, stolen or taken by Cardassians, and that caused a conflict. So it's that kind of thing. It's just like kind of a background thing. Like, does this feed the thematic plot we're trying to dive into here? There's not really a whole, beyond
Yeah.
Genesis.
It just seemed like super cool, like game changing kind of technology to kind of introduce into this
Yeah.
cartoon universe, and be like, these people figured out a way to terraform an entire planet with just this liquid that kind of takes over it. And
That was a little wild. Like, part of me was like, wait, did we know about this? As
Klingons started a war about this in the Genesis series.
Yeah.
so
I was
seems
like,
a big deal.
I was like, the Generation ship. I know about the Generation movie.
Mhm.
I've never heard about a Generation ship that can terraform planets or turn a tricorder into a living being. That's wild. But no, that was weird.
Yeah, I wonder what we'll get to see in season 3 of Discovery, since we are jumping farther into the future. And so, before Discovery, this and Picard are sort of our only glimpses into the farther futures of what's possible,
Yeah.
as far as technology goes. And obviously, we didn't see any of this specifically in Picard. So this would be like the farthest in the future instance we've sort of seen something of this caliber.
Well, in Picard, they had magic. They had a wrench that could be anything you want it to be.
Right.
It could be 10,000 Allison pill smiles.
Is that Doctor Who?
Oh, that's the screwdriver. Yeah.
right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's got to be wild to be one of the architects of Trek at this point in time and try to introduce new things while worrying about whether or not that interferes with some of the pre-existing canon, and if they can kind of skirt the rules and get away with these kind of technological advances in this story, because you can't just do that willy-nilly just to serve a plot of the week anymore, because ultimately these things, if you continue to establish them and then just kind of toss them by the wayside, doesn't it just kind of take away a little bit from the magical realism of what the world is that they're establishing?
Yeah, it's a pretty slippery slope, but I think if you're going to push it, you're going to do it in an animated
In the
comedy,
cartoon,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. But no, you have a really good point. Like, I'm sure I hope there's not, but there probably will be a point where I'll be like, oh, what, the koala's back? and it and he actually is the center of the universe. That takes
Shit.
away a little bit of the magic of Star Trek for me.
Ruins the joke because
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
oh, we dedicated an entire season to the koala now.
I was
Alright.
like, I was cool with the tardigrade. I don't know about the koala.
Definitely cool with the tardigrade.
It
Yeah.
reminded me of that, like the end of the first Men in Black movie where it's like the
Mhm,
big
mhm,
aliens playing with the marbles. And I was like,
mhm.
oh, we are
Yeah.
all just tiny little marbles.
So, as far as Mariner getting the tasks and making the best of them, we saw this last week a little bit with Boimler, where they were all being overtasked with a whole bunch of work to make efficiency rise, and he completely excelled at that. I feel like Boimler wouldn't even be concerned with trying to make a job fun, whereas Mariner needs to be enjoying what she's doing. He would just be like, the fact that I get to do this and do a great job to impress people is all the fun I need, and that's the charge and drive that he has. But it goes to show that all of these, our four heroes of the story, are all highly capable.
Yeah, I really liked that, Rutherford, definitely got the least amount of plot in this particular episode, but I didn't really mind. We got to see more Mariner and Tendi. I hope we get to see more of the two of them as well, especially their band. I need another song.
Yes.
Um, but I love that Rutherford was just like, oh man, I thought I was going to get to watch Data at this point. And then he gets to where he has to be. And he's like, oh, this Data is also really cool. Like, I am the ultimate nerd.
When Mariner gets promoted to lieutenant, she's no longer wearing a red shirt. She switches to yellow. What's up with that?
I was also trying to figure that out because I thought it was more to do with the department you were in. So I don't
Right.
know if it's because she was then going to be more in uh engineering or something, or I don't know. She seemed to be doing a lot of ops work, so maybe they made her a lieutenant within the ops department is my theory of
Yeah.
why she got a yellow shirt. But man, I loved all of the references in her sequence of leadership events because we got to see the weird bar like talent night.
Oh
And
God.
then
It definitely felt like there was a big string of deep cut references that I was not getting at all.
Yeah. The
lots
all
of TNG.
all of those horrible things that she had to attend that were like higher upper decks social hour were
Mm.
just all commenting and parodying those type of events that we saw in TNG with
Like, I got
Picard
the
and Riker and all them hanging out and playing poker and
that part I got. I was like, oh, I
Mhm,
remember seeing that poker episode where it was like,
mhm.
oh, this is not riveting. It's actually kind of boring watching these guys play poker.
Executive poker. And then oh man, when they were like, oh, and then Ransom is having a birthday party and it's mandatory, and then he's gonna sing songs about his time in Barcelona. And
Yes.
it's like
At least it wasn't Ibiza.
Ibiza. Like everyone who's ever had a friend who spent too long in Spain and comes back and pronounces it that way. Anyway, it was a
Oh
great
yeah,
cut.
yeah.
There,
The
there are definitely a
sexiest
couple
peninsula.
episodes. There are definitely a couple episodes of TNG where people are mandated to go to like Data's poetry reading or Data like doing some kind of musical performance that he's very technically adept at, but just has no soul and is really boring. And Riker usually falls asleep. So yeah, this was definitely winking at all that stuff.
Yeah.
So to the people that are watching us currently over on YouTube or on Twitch, on Periscope, perhaps, maybe even over on Facebook, I did want to say, if you guys
TikTok.
do have comments about this episode, questions that you want us to read on air, you should go ahead and type POD at the start of your comment, and then go ahead and comment with your thoughts, and we will bring those in a moment. But to you guys, I had another thought I want to kind of run by you guys. We're 4 episodes in right now, and I generally think that one should give a show about 4 episodes to kind of get the feel of how a show's flowing, the character dynamics, the voice of the show, and if it's something that you are going to want to stick with, or if it's not really your cup of tea. And I'm of course on board. I mean, we're doing this show. I was going to be on board regardless. But now I'm kind of wondering with this show, what do you guys make of the vision and trajectory of the storyline beyond for people that are lower decks that are just trying to make the best of their job and maybe rise to the ranks, I guess? Is there something else? Is there a larger kind of plot arc that you guys are seeing yet?
I think it's all character based, and I'm happy about that. Someone in the comments said that this episode, the overall the outside conflict that was driving all the action on the ship was one of the most, probably the most Star Trek plot we've seen on this show, and that's really true. But it was also just kind of whatever. Like, there was some cool animation to it, but I don't really care about that stuff. I care more about how deep these characters are going to go, how they're going to relate to each other, how they're going to grow, what we're going to find out about them in terms of, like, Mariner, one of my favorite Star Trek characters now, what makes her the way she is, what are the secrets that she's hiding, did she get kicked off a ship for doing something questionable. I watch shows for characters for the most part, and I'm liking all these characters. I want to see more of Rutherford. Every time he's on, he makes me smile and makes me laugh, and I haven't seen much of him. But in terms of overall, I mean, the theme is just be yourself, and it's kind of aspirational, and I'm enjoying that. I don't really think I need a whole, like, several seasons long deep arc. Like, this isn't Dark on Netflix. It's fine.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Mike. I think the characters are at the heart of this show. I also think I don't think I figured out what the overarching message is going to be, because this is so different from all other Treks we've ever had, both in it being it is a comedy, it is animated, but also because we are watching characters who are not their fully formed selves, like, at all. Like, we're not seeing people who are on the upper decks who have had their time in their career and, like, a past to sort of call upon as characters. Like, we're seeing these characters develop their past. So I agree. It's definitely, so far the idea seems to be, like, learn from the crew that you're around in order to make yourself a better crew member, because you can't just stay totally insular and succeed. Like, it takes the full crew for all of this to happen. And even based on, like, the small preview we got for next week, when they're like, even though the ship is falling apart, our job is to keep it together. And I think that, in essence, is the theme of this show thus far, is like, and of a lot of Star Trek, is like, things fall apart all the time, but we have to rely on each other to keep it together. So I
Community.
think, yeah, community. I think that's, like, where we're going. I hope we get even more Mariner backstory. I think she, like Mike, has become one of my favorite characters. I'm excited to see more from Tendi, because we don't have any concrete, formation of the Orions as far as, like, how they act as Starfleet officers instead of characters in a planet acting as sex symbols. So I'm excited to see where that goes. And I think all of the character, like the main character choices that they've made for the show have been smart, and I'm in. I watch it twice every week. I don't think if I didn't like it, I would watch it twice.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like this is episodic at this point. I could have taken, and for the most part, maybe without that pilot one, rearranged the order of these, and it would not really have affected anything plot wise. We're not building on our learning through a narrative arc so much as continued little slices into the personalities of these characters, with the exception of maybe we're seeing the rise of Mariner to eventually be part of leadership. But I think that would probably also destroy the initial structure of this being Lower Decks. And by the
Good.
very nature of this being a Lower Decks show, I suppose that means that they're not privy to the narrative arcs of the ship itself, its quest, and maybe some longer running storylines that we aren't aware of.
Right.
I wonder if it's eventually going to kind of open up to that as this show moves beyond just kind of character development, because at a certain point I think we're gonna know our characters fairly well, and then we're gonna want to see how they can grow within that kind of narrative arc. But right now, the themes, the motifs that are going on here, I'm feeling all of it. I think I'm right there with you guys. I'm enjoying it a lot.
Yeah. That being said, I mean, I don't really need this to move along that much. I mean, I just want these characters to grow inch by inch a little bit. If we get a whole episode that's all about Rutherford's cyberpunk eye breaking down and everybody trying to fix it and it's funny, I'm happy. Chupi says there is definitely an ongoing message on the show of be yourself and listen to yourself. Don't be a rule follower just because that's the standard, because it doesn't always work as well. Yeah, it's definitely
Break
a
the
theme
rules.
of that. Home Chickie Grant, she says, have an answer to Grant's question. I like that we saw Tendi have a kiss with a red shirt, and I like that Boimler will have a girlfriend for an episode next time. We saw that on the next episode. So it's not just our four heroes. So we're seeing more characters come into the show. That's true.
But watching them maneuver through the lower ranks, kind of like Friends or a college show.
Right. This is kind of like the Star Trek Hangout show, a little bit.
The new girl of Star Trek.
The community of Star Trek. Yeah.
All right, I can kind of see that. Kern said, don't you want to see a duet with Ransom
Yes.
playing acoustic guitar and Riker playing the trombone?
100%.
I want to see their rendition of Faith of the Heart. Bring it.
Or Requiem for a Hug.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I can go the distance with this show if it doesn't have if it doesn't start showing a little bit more glimmers of the larger kind of mythology and drive for this show. Like, we definitely, that's so much of what we get in Picard and so much of what we get in Discovery. And, just thinking about other animated shows that I find I relate to the most, like Adventure Time or Rick and Morty or BoJack Horseman. Like, you really get these narrative arcs in there. Probably the least so is like Adventure Time, and even then they pepper it in enough that you start getting this kind of more fleshed out idea of tragic backstory and where things might eventually go, glimmers of the future. Give me some future crystals and show me some terrible destiny for some of these characters, and let's see if we can work out some shit there.
You see, I'm just like, give me some more character growth. Like, have Boimler realize that doing his best at these menial tasks isn't going to do him any favors, and he has to figure something else out to get noticed. have me give me an episode where or episodes where Mariner realizes that she's not really fulfilled in what she's doing, and maybe there is a way to reconcile her disgust for command with what she wants to do that will fulfill her um, on in her job and emotionally. You know, I want to see these characters grow. Give me an episode where Tendi um, gives us the backstory of the Orions and how she did not end up as an enslaved Orion like we've seen many Orions in Star Trek, and how she is the complete opposite of that. She's such a free spirit who can do anything she wants. You know, that's interesting and exciting to me. I just want to see. I think these characters, when they brought them on board to this show, even Rutherford, every single one of them, all these four main characters, dropped hints about a really rich inner life and backstory that we have really yet to explore. So I think that's going to be seeded out over the next, you know, however how long this show lasts.
Yeah, and I think a lot about Tuca and Birdie in this particular instance because
Okay.
uh, that show, you know, the first few episodes does feel like sort of just a sort of like a little raunchy, like women focused, you know, animated show, and then you eventually get to the heart of these two characters, and then the by the time you hit the end, you're just like, wow, it all like lined up for a purpose. And so I have a feeling we're going to probably get there just based on like the writing staff of this show and like the talent that they've been able to pull in. I have high hopes for, and you know, and I'll see how that plays out. I know Tuca and Birdie finally just got picked up for a second season on like Adult Swim, I think. So I'll get to see how that pays off for them in the longer run as far as like a more deep seated uh like adult animation show and how that they play with plot in that particular way. So I have hope that we're going to get those rich backstories like y'all have been talking about, but then Grant, to your point, I think we'll eventually also get to some of those larger, more meaningful themes that we've seen in some of the other Trek shows.
Yeah, I hope so.
I'm gonna go off with a another comment from Chupi, who says, "What if it's not about growing into leadership, like Grant was talking about, because some people stay ensigns, but it's about teaching leadership how to lead better, remembering being lower decks?" And I think, yeah, I think there probably should be a lot of personal growth going on with the leadership on the Cerritos, so I can definitely see that happening, Chupi.
Season 3 of this show is just gonna be called Dex. They all graduate, so it's like
Random decks.
yeah, Dex.
Random
or
decks.
or each season they move up one, so then it's like lower middle decks and then middle decks, and then we finally get an upper decks.
Upper Deckers, season 5.
What a deck.
Okay, well, we're coming up on the hour. Thank you so much for joining us on the pod this week. Remember, you can find us live on YouTube every Thursday talking Trek. And of course, we will be covering Lower Decks every single week and continuing on to Discovery Season 3 right after Lower Decks. So go to StarTrekPod.co to subscribe.
Yeah, I'm so ready for season 3 of Discovery as well. Which did y'all see? I'm sure all of you already know, but just to make sure we covered it, they're going to be airing season 1 of Discovery on CBS proper.
Yeah.
So if you want an excuse to watch regular TV and check out season 1 in preparation for season 3, that will be available. But if you're looking for additional content, you can also still join us over on our Patreon. There we have a whole back catalog of bonus content, including our Badass Women of Trek series, which we're going to pick back up soon, and then an entire Best of 7 of 9 series as well. And we'll be continuing our new J.J. Abrams Trek movie saga soon.
And we're on the social medias, guys. You can follow us over on Twitter and on Instagram at Star Trek Pod. You can tweet all about this episode. You can tell all your friends on all of your you know, if I don't know if TikTok's still around or if that got sold
it
to
is.
Walmart or whatever, but you know, go ahead and make your sweet TikTok videos about us and spread the word. You know,
show us your sarcastic Vulcan salutes.
Yeah, there we go. Shout out to Karen, who helps run Twitter, and James Worm, who helps run our Insta. We appreciate you guys so much.
Again, thanks so much for joining us on Star Trek Discovery Pod. Grant, where can we find you on the internet?
At Baron Von Grant.
Mariah.
And I'm at Mariah Gossett. That's Mariah with a Y and a Gossett with 2 S's and 2 T's.
Follow me on Twitter at Mike M. Garcia. Come back to watch the live pod next Thursday, 9 p.m. Central. Every Thursday at 9 Central. Live long and prosper.